See, we got hand sanitizer on our desk over here.
Welcome to Myth Informed. I'm your host, Brian Edward. Along with me is Michael Karish. And we have one libertarian, one progressive behind the thing, and we're interviewing Jeff Waldorf. So I'm going to be outnumbered here. Jeff is definitely a progressive pundit. He is the host of Around the Nation with Jeff Waldorf, part of the Young Turks network on YouTube. He was also a guest speaker at Minds IRL conference in Philadelphia at the Sugar House Casino, where we enjoyed meeting him. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, thank you. Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
So, Jeff,
Good to have you.
Would you describe yourself as a Bernie bro, and do you find that word to be pejorative?
Look, I would say that it's Bernie bro is one of those manufactured media narratives. Mm-hmm. Actually, the Sanders coalition is incredibly young, diverse. People like me are the outlier, the white middle-aged male. In fact, I think according to most polling, generally more in my generation, my age range, would be polling for Biden right now.
Makes sense. Yeah. But do you think it's a pejorative, the Bernie bro? Like, is that a name?
It's a definite manufactured media narrative that came out of 2008, where Hillary Clinton, when she was running against Barack Obama, there were certain writers, and you can go and look up the article, that was titled, "Hey, Obama boys, back off." So it was a natural outgrowth of that. And whenever Hillary Clinton is involved, she is thrown around allegations of sexism. And really, since the internet has taken off, and Twitter specifically, it's been really kind of expanded to include anybody who challenges that kind of neoliberal centrist power online.
Okay. Do you see like much? What's the difference between, say, Hillary Clinton and I guess maybe presumptive nominee Joe Biden? Maybe not. But what do you think? What's the substantive difference between Biden and Hillary, in your opinion?
As far as like policy or
both, just policy, ethics.
I mean, I think they're fairly similar on a lot of policy. Obviously, they kind of represent the no change or very, very small amounts of change, kind of along the fringes of liberal thought, and that's, I mean, they're exactly alike on that perspective, that they're not really offering anything to the progressive base. But you see that a lot with a lot of the establishment candidates as well. I mean, Amy Klobuchar straight up told you, "I ain't getting you nothing," right? And Pete Buttigieg with his flowery language, but no substance as well. And so that's kind of what the Democratic establishment does, is they offer you really different flavors of nothing.
Okay.
Now, basically vanilla ice cream with either
not even
vanilla. Not even, but
you're given an empty cone and to say, go get your own ice cream.
How big is that base? Like, so if you got the Democratic Party as a pie graph, how much is the progressive base, in your opinion?
Look, when it comes to people who agree with progressive policies, I would say a very large portion of that base. I mean, when you look, for example, exit polling, right, is a great indicator of how people feel, and of course there are different polls that have varying degrees of this particular question. Let's take Medicare for All, for example. You had in all these exit polls in 2020 majority support for progressive policy, and so majority support for $15 minimum wage, majority support for free college, things like that. So really, the progressive base, I mean, progressive policies are huge, but do a lot of these voters, and that's the question that I don't really necessarily know the answer to, how many of them consider themselves progressive? I think a lot of the Democrats that are even voting for Joe Biden feel that they are progressive. So it's sort of a nebulous question.
Yeah, when you look at the policies, when you ask someone who's, I had drinks with my dad tonight, just before I came on the podcast, and I was talking with him about these policies, Medicare for all, living wage, all these things, and he's like, yeah, I support those. But Biden seems like the safe option. He's about 66, so he's in that demographic that votes for Biden the majority of the time, 90% of the time, and this is the message that has been punched. I punched and pounded into the heads of voters his age. That Biden is the safe option, but the idea is that policy matters, but not to the majority of voters. A majority of voters don't care about politics. They don't care about policy. Not when you put it on a general scale. You ask them about the policy when you're having a one-on-one conversation. They go, yeah, sure, that makes sense. But when you're in the general political sphere, when you're on voting day, it's how does that make me feel, right? How does that politician make me feel? Does that politician make me feel safe? That's what matters to them, I think.
What do you think,
Well,
Jeff?
I mean, go ahead.
No, what do you think? I was going to say. Yeah, Colin.
Look, I think there's a certain amount of truth to that. I mean, I like to make the comparison of Joe Biden being a comfortable sweater, right? So he's somebody that kind of brings back in some people positive feelings, warm feelings from the Obama administration, where everything was nice and safe and normal. I also like to make the comparison that, a return to normal. That's kind of what Joe Biden's running on. I want to return to normal, right? That's sort of the MAGA of the left. And I know that, Bernie Sanders has been compared, and Bernie Sanders supporters have been compared to the MAGA of the left, but that's mainly, of course, tying into the Bernie bro narrative, right? But in reality, what was MAGA? Make America Great Again, right? Let's go back to a time where things were better. That is distilled down to the core, right? Where I felt more comfortable. Well, now you've got that same phenomenon going on left in the Democratic Party, where you have these, people who generally, are just afraid, right? Because they see what's going on in the White House and they think, oh my God, that's not normal. We've got a president that's tweeting out insane things all the time, and then we're scared about the Supreme Court and all this stuff. So I don't know. Let's vote for the safe option. And going back to your original point, when you talk about policy, yes, it does matter, but and it's it goes sort of to the disconnect, right, that we're seeing right now on the progressive side, saying, well, how come you don't support Bernie Sanders when he has all these policies that are incredibly popular? Well, it goes back to what the first I think the biggest priority for Democratic voters has been revealed to be, and that is to get rid of Trump, to kind of get back to that safety, right? To put that old sweater back on. The only problem is the sweater is soaked in gasoline and the house is on fire.
It's covered in dead bodies from Yemen
but you
and
could,
other places.
But like, say, take in 2016, and you had a Republican thinking, okay, Trump or Cruz, and they were, thinking about that and saying, well, Cruz has got a better political machine. He's probably more apt to get something done. Trump's a complete outsider. How's he going to create a coalition? He's never going to get anything done, right? I mean, you might be able to say that. Is it reasonable for somebody on the left to say, I think Biden's got a better political machine. Bernie's an outsider. He's not going to get anything done. So maybe we'll get a little with Joe, and Bernie's would never get anything passed. Is that reasonable?
I think to an extent, yeah. I mean, when you look at the facts on the ground, Bernie Sanders has an incredibly formidable political machine, except the only issue is he really failed to make inroads with Democratic Party power players, right? And that's one of the big criticisms that I'm seeing from, a lot of mainstream pundits. Well, he didn't kiss. Can I swear on this?
Yeah, you can swear.
Okay. I was going to say, he didn't kiss as much ass as the normal politician does, right? And you saw Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg taking one for the team, right? For the team establishment, and kissing Joe Biden's ass, and then Michael Bloomberg, and then all that. And that's where you saw that gigantic, coalition that was formed, or I should say the centrist Voltron, that had coalesced, and that really, it crushed Bernie Sanders. He couldn't go up against that, even though he has massive fundraising, right? He's outraised a lot of his opponents. And he had a gigantic volunteer army, millions, lots of volunteers, knocked on millions of doors, or hundreds of thousands of doors. I don't know, a lot of doors. Okay,
I mean,
and tried to get the word out the best that they could with this volunteer army. But unfortunately, it obviously wasn't enough because, and this is my main critique here is all of that work was undone in the last couple of days with those massive endorsements and by a very highly paid pundit on television saying that Bernie's not safe, Biden's safe, and that's the only way we're going to get rid of Trump is to go with the safe option.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I definitely think I was surprised to see before Super Tuesday those guys get out. Like, I thought after Super Tuesday we'd see something, but for that to happen immediately after the South Carolina results and within days, because that was Saturday. You didn't get the results out till, say, Saturday night or Sunday morning, and you got an election Tuesday morning.
Mm-hmm.
That was quick. So.
Yeah, well, it was a lot of rumor about Obama making some calls and saying, "Hey, look, we've got to coalesce. We've got to stop Sanders, blunt his momentum." And I know to some people that sounds like, oh, it's a conspiracy, right? No, they literally had stop Sanders meetings where even Pete Buttigieg was involved in these, meetings in I don't know if it were in wine caves or in smoke-filled back rooms. It doesn't even necessarily have to be. But they got together and they said, well, look, we don't, for whatever reason, and you could assign ulterior motives and say, oh, yeah, we just want to stop Sanders because we don't want our taxes to go up. Or you could say something like, well, they just, all these centrist politicians believe that if Bernie Sanders were nominated, he would lose to Donald Trump, and we can't afford to do that. And that's ascribing the nicest motives to them. I generally don't ascribe those motives, but I wanted to put it out there anyway.
Yeah.
I think it was one of those things where it's like, we can't have Sanders change the party by taking over the party because that's going to give him too much power, and a lot of us are going to lose our jobs. Yeah. We can't have that. So let's coalesce.
You can't. I forget how the quote goes exactly, but you can't. A man will always do, and I say a man, a person will always do what is in their best interest if their job is on the line, right?
Yeah.
If their job is on the line, they'll protect that job at all costs.
Absolutely. Or a man doesn't understand something if his paycheck depends on him not understanding it.
That's exactly it right there. That's the one.
That's the old Upton Sinclair quote. So, yeah, I'm very familiar with that because, again, that explains a lot of corporate media as well and how they treat outsiders.
Right. Now, it's weird. The same worry could have happened in 2016 on the Republican side that, oh, my God, we can't let Trump win. I don't know if there were never Trump meetings. There could have been. There's certainly a never Trump faction that's still there. But for the most part, I went to CPAC, right? And things are relatively united. It's kind of weird. There's some people that really think, yeah, God, I just don't like his Twitter. I wish he would shut up. And then there's others that, oh, man, isn't he great? He's owning those. He's owning people on Twitter. So, but yet there's a weird, okay, we're on the same side. Do you think that could happen with Bernie?
I'm not really sure. There's that famous saying, right, where Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line, right? and that's essentially what it is because, look, I gotta hand it to Republicans. You guys know how to get your shit together. Well, not saying you're a Republican.
Well, that's fair.
If you're Republicans watching, you guys know how to organize. You guys know how to get together and stick together, even if the choice is unorthodox. And that was one of the things that I noticed in 2016 is, of course, the Republican establishment wasn't exactly thrilled with someone like Donald Trump, but Trump also blindsided them completely. They underestimated him 100%, and that allowed him to roll the field. I kept saying back in 2016, he's Donkey Konging everybody in the head, and he's gonna win. He's gonna win.
But the Republican establishment seemed to just move aside and just let it happen, whereas the Democratic establishment doesn't seem to want to do that.
Still there, Jeff? Jeff, you froze for a second there. Well,
so yeah, I'm not sure right now, Jeff. I think it's paused. Okay, and it popped back in. We had a bit of a glitch there.
Yeah,
a glitch in the matrix.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah. The establishment hacked our system and put a glitch in.
But the Republicans just moved aside. And do you think they muddled left, or is the Democratic establishment muddling more than the Republican establishment?
What do you mean? Are they?
I mean, like trying to. It seemingly they just kind of let Trump go. You know that they weren't going to try to do anything to do it.
As you said, they were. As Jeff said, they weren't ready for Trump.
But it's also different with the winner-take-all primary. They may never caught up, whereas...
The Republicans didn't have a Bernie Sanders until Donald Trump, right? There was no real anti-establishment candidate until Donald Trump came on the stage, and they weren't ready for it. And and fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, Donald Trump steamrolled them. Bernie Sanders went up against Hillary Clinton and got destroyed, unfortunately. Because it was rigged. But the point is that the establishment on the Democratic side was able to take the lessons they learned from Bernie Sanders, although I don't know if they really learned their lesson. They suck at learning lessons. But they apparently learned their lesson from Bernie Sanders and were able to coalesce behind Biden in the right particular time. They took that and went, okay, clearly we don't want Bernie to win. So we don't want a repeat of 2016. We're going to repeat it anyway. And the people who know that we're going to repeat it or know we're going to repeat it. But the general population is going to be completely blindsided. But so the point is the Republicans didn't have their own Bernie Sanders. The Democrats did.
Well, and there's something that the Democrats have that the Republicans didn't, and that is I'm getting some feedback here, but
yeah,
it's weird.
You're glitching out a little bit.
It was just
a
go ahead.
Bit. Yeah. So, but what the Republicans don't have that the Democratic Party does have is the Democrats have a way to stop insurgent candidates built into their primary system. That we didn't see that with the Republicans. They've got winner take all. They don't have their contested conventions or anything like that that I've seen. They don't have rules for making sure to stop insurgent Republican candidates. And I think it's actually because they tend to be more receptive to their base. The Democrats, I don't think they like their base. At least I don't think they like the progressive base, especially. And they pulled out everything and any special rule they can to stop them. I know they go back and say, well, it's because of, Dukakis and all these losses that we had. I don't know. I don't really buy that.
Would you prefer to have like a Republican style primary on the Democratic side?
With like a winner take all system? I would like to see a whole host of different reforms to the primary system, because I think right now the system that we have is kind of garbage. So, I would like to see things, maybe adjustments in, like a ranked choice kind of voting, things where maybe we don't spread out the primary season so far, like we kind of make it within maybe a couple of weeks, so that we don't have, because there are states that vote even after the nomination is essentially clinched. It basically wastes their vote. I mean, New York doesn't vote for a while yet. A lot of these other states don't vote for a while yet. And we're already talking about, maybe Bernie should drop out or whatever.
Yeah.
And so the whole primary system in this country is a mess.
Yeah. In Wisconsin, we're number 37 out of 51. Where I'm counting D.C. in there. So, a lot of times it's already done for us.
And we're the only one voting on that day. Right?
Yeah. Now we have open primaries, so you can go and flip if you want, which is kind of fun. Like, why do you think Bernie's staying in the race? What's the strategy?
I think this, know necessarily, but I'm just going to guess that he's trying to get as many delegates as he can to get as much leverage as he can to ask the Biden team for concessions. I mean, that would be the smart political play. That'd be something that I would do. At least, get as many delegates as you can before it's truly, over and Biden's got an insurmountable lead, which could happen as soon as next week. But you play that advantage as much as you can to try to maybe get a cabinet appointment for something like, for somebody to be put on Treasury Secretary, for example, that is a progressive. I know Bernie Sanders isn't going to angle for anything for himself. We've seen that he's not that kind of politician, that he's not really. I know the mainstream media loves to come up with the narrative that, he's egotistical, whatever. But no, in reality, he's going to try to find the best person to get appointed to the job. Maybe holding out for a progressive VP pick to kind of bridge unity. I know some people have been talking about Nina Turner being able to be, Joe Biden's VP, which would fit. African-American woman, very progressive, great unity pick. Hey, Biden people, if you're listening.
And who was that
in the
again?
Democratic establishment.
I didn't know her.
Some unity, that might help.
Who is she again? Who is your VP pick?
Nina Turner.
Bernie's campaign manager, I think. Bernie surrogate.
Yeah, it's former head of Our Revolution as well. So she's an amazing, wonderful speaker. She's a great surrogate for Bernie Sanders and campaign co-chair.
Okay.
Campaign co-chair, yep.
Okay. Now, the fact that he said, and they all said, I'm going to support the nominee no matter what. I thought that was hilarious when, Elizabeth Warren is just ripping on Bloomberg, saying he's this horrible, misogynistic sexist, but I'll support whoever we nominate. They've all said that. Does that hurt him? Does that give him, has he lost his bargaining power?
I mean, that certainly does not help. If I were in that position, I wouldn't do that. I would more listen to someone like Crystal Ball, who has come out and said, no, you don't say the power is in what what you don't do, right? And you don't promise them that you're going to support them if you lose right off the bat.
Because it gives them an
You've
out.
got to keep that leverage and say, you know what? Maybe I'll support you, but maybe you got to think about doing something for us and our voters, since we got such a large share of the vote against you. Somewhere around 30-40%. Maybe we'll see what you can do for us. This is how it normally works in Washington, from what I understand too, except that Bernie Sanders again doesn't necessarily play the Washington game. He kind of sucks at it. That's one of his weaknesses, I think.
I think something with Bernie Sanders that I've noticed is he plays anti-establishment, and this is, I'm a Bernie bro to my core. I know I say Bernie bro, but like I'm a Bernie supporter to my core. But he plays to the anti-establishment message. But when push comes to shove, he's been in politics too long. He's part of the game. He's part of that system, right? They're his coworkers, right? I mean, it's like going up against your coworkers. You like your coworkers; they're nice people. It's hard to attack your coworkers, and I think Bernie, on some level, sees Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and these people as coworkers. So we have to couch it in that terms a little bit.
It was hilarious in the chat. Tom Leach says, like, the return to normalcy was Warren G. Harding's platform, which I find that's kind of funny. And ABK says, like, some of did the Cuba thing. Do you think that hurt him? Having to defend that. I mean, or was that just hype?
Well, I think it's partly hype, because I don't think anything that he said was really all that controversial. Oh, they've got a good literacy program. Yeah, okay. And then he also said, by the way, it is a terrible dictatorship, and I'm not in favor of that. But hey, literacy program, right? As if somehow now pointing out things that some people do good and some people do bad, and having a nuanced point of view is suddenly a bad thing. But it is when you're dealing with, of course, dishonest media actors.
Okay, but
they're going to take anything you put out there as negative.
True,
but
but
anything Bernie puts out there, they're going to spin it as negative.
They're going to make hay with the marriage or the honeymoon in the Soviet Union. Having like the sister city with Yaroslavl. I mean, that of course they're going to make political hay with that. But do you think that did that hurt him, or is it more just socialist? Just that term. That's a boogeyman.
Well, that's definitely a boogeyman in older voters, right? Younger voters aren't as susceptible to that, and you can see that borne out by polling. I don't have the exact figures, but a lot of younger people don't necessarily care about it. But older voters who do tend to turn out a little bit more, they do get scared by that label. And that's one other frustration is he says, well, I'm a democratic socialist. No. You're an FDR Democrat. In an actual democratic socialist country, you'd be a centrist. But say you're an FDR Democrat and really stress the Democrat. That would be my advice.
Sure, but we asked in a poll one time, like, is there a substantive difference between democratic socialist and socialist? Like, in your opinion, how would you answer that question?
Well, I would hint to that these labels don't really mean anything anymore because it's been redefined so many different times. I mean, socialism is literally taking over the means of production.
Yeah.
And so that, of course, in Bernie Sanders, democratic socialism, right? He doesn't talk about taking over the means of production.
So why use the word? Why not just use something else?
I think at some point,
like FDR Democrat,
there was a question asked to Bernie that he labeled himself as a socialist, and he made the mistake of calling himself a democratic socialist as opposed to a social democrat, because the social democratic movement in Finland and Denmark and the Scandinavian countries is more along the lines of what Bernie supporters and what Bernie supports. And if you put it, and he made the mistake of calling himself a democratic socialist because Hitler was a democratic socialist.
But aren't the Swedish
right? He ran as a democratic socialist, and it's easy for the media to just go, okay, democratic.
But that's the right-wing
socialist.
party in Sweden, isn't it? I'm pretty sure that the Social Democrats is the right-wing party. I may be wrong, but
I think it's the centrist party.
I don't know.
Right, if Bernie was running in England or in France, he would be a centrist.
But no, that's a good question, Jeff. That why didn't say I'm an FDR Democrat? That's actually probably less scary. FDR still has, like, he managed the war well. I mean, his speeches, obviously the dastardly attack by the Empire of Japan is worth listening to.
And also some of the policies are along the same lines. Social Security, and then later on LBJ's Medicare, and just being able to expand on that history of economic progress. Not only that, but you've got an expansion or bringing to fruition the Economic Bill of Rights, or the Second Bill of Rights. Everybody has a right to a job. Everybody has a right to health care, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's not as scary because, again, when you talk to the American people and you ask them about policy, generally on a lot of these issues, they would agree. Yes, I like the idea of having healthcare, guaranteed through the government, no premiums, copays, deductibles, et cetera. But one of the mistakes that was made too, and this was really played up by dishonest media actors, as I keep referring them to in mainstream media, is they would basically frame the debate as in you're going to have something taken away from you. You're going to have your insurance taken away through work. You don't want to lose that, right? You don't want to lose your employer-sponsored insurance or your private insurance. He's going to take it away. He's going to take it away. But they never say we're going to replace it with something better, guaranteed insurance, and it's going to be cheaper, no premiums, copays, deductibles, et cetera, and all that stuff. So, I mean, that just goes to dishonest framing. And Sanders, again, invited that on himself by using wrong labels and not explaining his policies as clearly. And not only that, again, but the coverage of those policies was terrible on mainstream media.
Okay. Now, one good segue there. So ABK, thanks for the super chat. So ABK is asking, he never really explained in a realistic way how to pay for all the free stuff. Didn't that hurt him? Like, how would you respond to that?
He explained it multiple times on the debate stage, multiple times. But the media narrative was never. They would all like this was the major gripe on progressive media. You covered it, Kyle Klinsky covered it, Nico House covered it. Like on the debate, they went from how are you gonna pay for this? He explained how he's gonna pay for it.
But
the next question to, I believe it was Biden, was, okay, Bernie Sanders has a terrible healthcare system. He hasn't explained how he's going to pay for it. How is he going to pay for it?
Well, here was the so Republican to me is not a pejorative. Libertarian's probably more accurate, but Republican is at least on the dartboard. But in the right wing media, you were hearing, okay, no, Bernie's not explaining this. But now Warren, they're saying Warren tried to explain it and actually tried to policy wonk this, and that killed her. So this is why Bernie was purposely being vague. Like, how would you respond to that?
Well, I don't think he was being vague at all. Again, he went into great detail on how to explain it. It's just, again, going back to the media that didn't actually show those explanations at all. I mean, one of the things that Bernie Sanders was very clear on is how he would end up raising taxes on the middle class. He was not afraid of saying, look, we're going to raise your taxes. We're going to put a 4% payroll tax on you. But what it's going to amount to is it's going to end up saving you money on your health insurance, and your entire family is going to be covered. And so it's going to end up being a net positive for you. We're also going to, raise taxes on the ultra wealthy. We're going to do some wealth taxes and really kind of raise the corporate tax rate, et cetera, in order to fund these programs. And then look, a lot of the how you're going to pay for it is also based in savings over our current system. Our current system is incredibly expensive.
It is.
Right. It
is. It is. I
right,
agree. It's very expensive.
They say our current system is what, 40 trillion over 10 years, and the healthcare, the Medicare for all would cost 36 trillion over 10 years. That's being conservative, and they never tell you in corporate media. They never say, "Oh, but our current health system costs 40 trillion." They only say. It would be super expensive and cost 36 trillion. How could you do that?
But no, I think but Ben Shapiro and others were saying about 101 trillion. That's what they were saying. That the number you got to make up is another 60.
I haven't seen any studies on that that shows that kind of number. All the studies that I've seen show around that 35 trillion over 10 years.
Yeah, it's just weird because right now we have just the weird tiered system that, Blue Cross Blue Shield pays so much more to the hospitals. Medicare, if everyone, they'd have to increase the reimbursements on Medicare because no hospital could survive if insurance is only paying Medicare prices. So what are you going to do? And I think they're worried that the quality of healthcare is going to go down. So that's why they were jacking up the numbers.
Well, I was going to say part of that plan also made sure to fund hospitals, especially the ones that are rural hospitals, to end up giving them more money. And besides, the other part of that is look at how many people right now can't afford to pay hospitals. I mean, the non-reimbursement rate for everyone else who doesn't have private insurance, I mean, a lot of it gets picked up and eaten by the hospitals, right? And also gets spread to people who already have insurance. And so they end up seeing their rates increase because of so many people that are uninsured. And so what you have here is these costs being spread out where you could centralize the cost from using the government as your main insurer, and these hospitals end up not missing out on this funding. They get funded, they stay in business, and you still have those, Medicare rates that end up saving you money.
And the other thing on top of that is how many people are going bankrupt and how many people can't pay their medical bills.
530,000 people a year.
So that's a lot of money that the health insurance companies and the hospitals aren't getting because the people actually can't pay. They literally can't pay. So
and let me go back to that stat here. That's 530,000 people a year who get cancer, right, that can't afford it, that go bankrupt within 2 years.
Yeah, but there is quite a bit of bills. I do know a person personally that got cancer, and she got cancer. She actually did have health insurance, and she still has enormous bills. And that you got to feel for that. I'm sympathetic to that. I worry that the government, as a single payer, mismanages things. Like I don't necessarily trust them to do this. I mean, even with the COVID-19 piece, the CDC was supposed to get out all kinds of testing kits, didn't do it, and I'm a little bit better at. My gut is to trust small business and private industry more so than the government.
Well, I mean, when you look at small business and industry, they're not immune from mess ups either. And so they're
Sure.
not immune from making mistakes. And oftentimes when you put a profit motive, that's incentive to cut corners. And so, again, not every company's going to do that. But generally, when you have a profit motive, they'll either inflate prices or cut corners in order to, of course, save money and funnel that towards executive pay or just normal payroll or whatever. And so I think the benefit for a Medicare for All system is the reduction in administrative costs. And that's what we see, not just with Medicare reimbursement rates, but we have elimination on advertising, for example. Again, executive pay, all these different costs end up disappearing under a single payer healthcare system.
Yeah, I mean, they might. The way I see it is the insurance companies, I think, are making a pretty thin margin. I think a lot of where that cost goes up is pharmaceutical and medical device. Their prices are increasing a ton, and I think part of that is because they can pass it along.
And then you also have, of course, there are some hospitals and some, as you said, pharmaceutical companies that do inflate their costs. And some of it, of course, is to pay for people who can't, pay their medical bills. So one problem ends up creating another and another in this long chain. And you have a system where the costs of goods and services go up. Another thing that adds to the cost, Joe, is you mentioned doctor reimbursements, right? One of the reasons I think doctors make so much is because they have to go through so much medical school, which leaves them in a lot of debt. And so you do something about that student debt, you could also justify reducing those reimbursement rates because suddenly this doctor doesn't have to make $200,000 a year or $100,000 a year, whatever, how much they make, and direct a significant portion of it to paying off their student loans. So a lot of these policies that are progressive can interconnect with each other as well in order to introduce savings and kind of reshape or restructure the way that we do business in this country.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's one way to look at it. The upside, I mean, the fact that it's super expensive, I mean, as long as like people are talking about the trade-offs, I'm fair to talk about this. The one upside of having that is like people want to go into medicine. So we're getting like probably the best doctors. It's super competitive. We're also getting like the competition between medical device and pharma is getting us innovation at a spectacular level, but it's really expensive.
I mean, it is really expensive, but I also got to say a lot of this innovation, I mean, when you look, for example, EpiPens, how much innovation have we had in the EpiPen over the last, 60 years?
Well, the EpiPen, okay, but how much have we had in the Band-Aid, right? There's certain things aren't sexy products, but if you look at like, what our ability to do interoperative MRI, for example,
sure,
that was unheard of 15 years ago, and it's standard for neurosurgery now at any big hospital.
Well, and you also got to remember a lot of our research into pharmaceutical techniques also comes from taxpayer money. So we're already actually paying for this. And on top of that, being charged extra from the companies that then, sell to the hospitals and then do upcharges and things like that. And
and the thing, where is that research being done? Colleges, medical colleges. University of Wisconsin, Nebraska, Washington State, California, New York, all those the big colleges, and there's a ton of big colleges out there, of course, and there's some small ones too, but that's where this tax-funded, taxpayer research is being done on pharmaceuticals and.
Right. But it's not sometimes it's taxpayer, but these industries, medical device and pharma, does give a lot to those kind of. They want this kind of innovation too, so they do heavily support that.
And look, saying that allowing the government to negotiate doesn't mean that necessarily these pharmaceutical companies aren't going to get a good deal. I mean, you're going to have a system where, okay, it covers the cost of research development. If it's a private company, maybe a little bit of profit on the top, but it doesn't allow it to get to a point where prices are skyrocketing insane, where not only the government can't afford it, but regular people have a very hard time being able to afford it. And even insurance companies. And again, you were talking about the razor thin margin, and because of these costs, well, I mean, that's part of your cost right there.
It is. But now, how about this? So you're not? Are you kind of? Would you consider yourself anti-capitalist as a whole, or more just anti-capitalist with healthcare?
I'm not anti-capitalist.
Okay, not at all. Okay.
Look, I'm for a mixed market system, right? I think we should have strong property rights protections, and we should have a strong capitalist sector, but with rules, a decent amount of rules, and also a strong safety net. So I think where you have a role, for example, private insurance. I know they say, oh, ban private insurance. Actually, Medicare for All just bans duplicative coverage, which means anything that's not covered by Medicare for All, and you can negotiate in any final pieces of legislation what you leave out. There is a niche for health insurance companies to go in and do their thing, make a healthy profit. I am absolutely fine with that as long as people have the basics. And that's, I think, what the role of government should be, is just allow people to have basics, and anything extra can be provided by the market, and they can make a profit from it. That's like healthy capitalism.
Okay. And that's fair. Okay.
No one on the left is advocating that the government makes your shoes, right?
No.
That'd
be terrible.
That's a
right
straw man argument that the right uses.
But the counter would be, okay, if the government is making us shoes, and that's terrible, but if the government is making our healthcare, then the quality will go down because.
But our government isn't making healthcare. It's not going to a UK-style system where the government actually does provide healthcare. This is just insurance.
No, right. But there's some that
taking the role of Aetna and saying, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take money from your taxes, and then we're going to just give it to the doctor for whatever service you have at the hospital so that you don't have to pay it out of pocket. I mean, that's their only role, is just being an insurer.
No, that's fine. It's just sometimes, a radical change, it's just hard to make. So
Scary.
Medicare for All, that's a big deal.
But a lot of people love Medicare as well. And so, I mean, you say, look, we expand the system, we expand what it covers, but we've got the basic infrastructure that seems to be already there. You just have to, like I said, build on it, expand on it. And it's actually, I think it'd be much simpler to implement than something like the ACA, which was a mishmash of private-public systems. And then you've got a whole system of subsidies and how much are you going to reimburse, how much you're going to give for a subsidy for a family of 4, a family of 3, making, however much amount of money. It really, the part of the appeal is the simplicity of it. You have insurance. It's guaranteed. If you lose your job, you still have insurance. And that's it. And it's really not going to change.
Now, what do you think about like the argument that higher social safety nets are easier to implement in a country that's more homogeneous? The Nordic countries, for example, are very homogeneous. And now we're a country that celebrates its diversity. So it's harder to have these broad social safety nets when people in, say, California don't trust the people in Ohio and vice versa.
I mean, is it really all that more difficult to imagine a fellow human being, fellow American, as a fellow human being, a fellow countryman? I mean, that's sort of the soul of patriotism is you're an American, you're my brother, or you're my sister, and we're all part of the same country. We have the same goals. We have the same life. Sure, you're somebody from the country, but when I talk to you, I don't mean you specifically, but you talk to somebody in rural Nebraska and you ask them about some of their values, and you're going to find a lot of agreement, even if you disagree on certain policy proposals, and a lot of that depends on framing.
No, I agree. I'm with you. But when people on the right see things like the 1619 Project, they wonder if we do share the fundamental values, because rather than us being founded on freedom, and although we didn't live up to our values, but eventually slowly are getting there to provide all these freedoms for women, Native Americans, black people, so on and so forth, that's the narrative. But the 1619 Project says, no, we're founded on slavery, that white supremacy is at the core of our very being. That's not at all like the same.
Well, I mean, look, we have to understand our past and how we got here if we're going to rectify some of the past, mistakes that we've made. Of course, we've had slavery. Of course, we can understand that a lot of our institutions were built on those things. But also, the understanding helps you to kind of change those systems that are left over, right? That are still endemic in some of, for our example, policing and, private, the prison system, for example. And so to try to work on that stuff, that doesn't mean that we're not part of the same country and that we don't have the same values. It's just that we have to realize that we have made mistakes in our country. And when you realize that and fix those mistakes, that makes us a stronger country. I think that makes us a stronger people.
Yeah, well, I can agree with you. I think that, it sounds like we share the same values, and that I think, that's a great basis to have a discussion. But you're right. If we don't, then that's troublesome. So maybe like part of that is finding, and that's part of what Better Discourse is trying to do. Not only have a civil discussion where, say, you and I disagree, maybe you two agree more, but have a civil discussion, but also find what our base values are to at least have a starting point. So maybe not so much what we disagree on, but what we agree on might be the most important.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree that freedom is great, but how do you define it as well, right? So, what kind of indicators do you use to denote freedom? And are we really the most free country in the world, or is it a place like New Zealand, which is consistently ranked higher than us in the Freedom Index, for example? How are they more free than us, right? But nonetheless, we can all agree on these, I think, basic values of humanity, brotherhood, etc.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's all the hype from Lord of the Rings.
Great movie, though, by the way.
Yeah, love Lord of the
series.
But this is seeing each other as human first, and this is something that I whenever someone asks me, "Oh, you're an atheist, you have no values." No, I see people as valuable first. That's the most important thing. You see each other as human, and once you see each other as human, that's a baseline. You can you have disagreements from there. I'm just basically summarizing the conversation at this point. But again, I reiterate and I agree with your point that we have to see each other as basic human beings first.
Right. And let me just add, too, with basic fundamental, I believe, rights and freedoms. And look, progressives, we just think that that having the ability to see a doctor and be able to afford to get medical treatment is part of our fundamental rights as a human being.
That's the right
as
to
a
life.
Human being or as a citizen? Because that's an important distinction.
I know it gets into tricky territory of like, oh, but then are we going to give undocumented immigrants access to our healthcare system? And I know I'm probably going to get a lot of flack from your audience, but again, I see us as human beings that I think in many ways can transcend borders in certain, at least, respects of human rights.
Yeah. But how do you stop then?
If we disregard those human rights, then what are we as a country? The Statue of Liberty, and this is a common thing. The Statue of Liberty, yes, but the Statue of Liberty says we take your poor, your huddled masses. Not if they don't provide health care, screw you, right? That's the fundamental root of our country, is providing for people, the American dream.
What do you think, Jeff?
Well, obviously, I totally agree with that. Yes,
but
we provide people with the American dream. Well, it's fun and interesting because we have a healthcare system that is kind of messed up. Going back to Bernie Sanders for a minute, Bernie Sanders would take people, probably about 50 people, and go over the Canadian border and buy cheaper Canadian drugs.
He did that with the insulin thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but you also have, for example, medical tourism to other places where people are poor. I had a friend, Ron Placone, who went and got dental work done in Mexico. And so we're already exporting ourselves to other countries to take advantage of their healthcare systems. And so I think it would be a little hypocritical if you get mad at some of, immigrants coming here and taking advantage of very basic medical services, which we barely even offer anyway.
But the counter argument would be that we already subsidize the world's healthcare to a degree. I mean, the reason why the pharmaceuticals are cheaper in Canada is that's the way the market is built. These companies they're counting on Americans paying more, and then they can give the discount to the Canadians. I mean, that's how the market works.
Well, I mean, then again, does the market account for the CEOs making tens of billions of dollars in executive compensation per year? I think they can do maybe without a couple of billion so that we can still maybe afford our insulin.
Right. I mean, it may that may or may not like significantly reduce it. I mean, it's hard to say. I see what you're saying, but the part of this is just the capitalist structure is going on. Like if you and I are small businessmen, then we can decide that we're not going, that we're going to give a little bit more to our employees. We're going to take whatever, we think. But when you're talking about like a big stock company, Boeing had laid off, they had made record profits a couple years back and then laid off 3,000 workers. Like how could they do that? But the main reason is they had to be competitive with McDonnell Douglas and show the same kind of gross and net profits. So people would send the capital their way. Because, I mean, if you're going to invest in a company that's giving you 20% return versus 10, who are you going to invest in? Of course, the one that's doing 20. So it wasn't so much that they needed to get rid of these work. They needed to keep up. So this is why I like small business a little more because,
that's another thing on top of that. We, as an American manufacturing, and you'll appreciate this, Jeff, but as an American manufacturing hub, we said, okay, it's cheaper to send those jobs to China. Now the American worker has to compete against a Chinese worker who will work for pennies on the dollar, and do manual labor that an American worker won't. See, we place high value on our individual labor, and the destruction of the union movement, the destruction of unions has really cut into that significantly.
It has. But the way to make that argument, I think, to Republicans, Jeff, comment on this, is if you're going to make that, there's a social conservative like argument. The libertarian argument is just to nope, wherever's cheaper, right, and make it cheap for the consumers. But there's a social conservative argument that says no, certain amount of our industries need to be at home, and the reason they do is because what if we have a COVID-19 outbreak and global supply chains are disrupted, or what if we have a war and we don't have enough foundrymen in the United States that know what they're doing, right? So you have to have a certain amount of industry here, even if it's more expensive, just so we can keep the knowledge. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, look, I think you also have to have a certain amount of industry at home that pays well so that workers can also buy the products.
Yeah,
I mean,
if people
look,
can't buy the products.
if you have an economy that's built on, and I think ours is mostly gone this way, to a service economy where where about 40% of Americans now make somewhere around $18,000 a year. They're working low-wage jobs. Well, you see the effects in the economy. The only reason that we're being kept up right now and having any sort of economic growth is the growth and expansion of debt. So people are taking out debt because mostly they can't afford regular things. And so moving away from that manufacturing base, because that was the idealized 1950s, time in America where a man could work a job, right? And generally it was men, so that's why I'm saying that, could work a job at the factory and take care of their family.
Yep.
A three-person, four-person family on just that one salary.
But the rest
Those
of the
jobs-
world was in ashes, and I think that's the reason,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that's partly
I mean,
true.
in 1950, the rest of the world is in ashes. There's no competitors.
Well, I mean, look, that is part of it, but a lot of our manufacturing has also gone away through terrible trade deals. Donald Trump hit on that very successfully. Bernie Sanders also talked about that, more so back in 2016 against Hillary Clinton than he has now, but he's also hit on trade deals, which were generally more favorable towards international corporations. And so, I mean, you've got those bad trade deals that sort of really kind of emphasize, hey, let's go to the cheapest, let's do a race to the bottom, to a lot of these countries that are really more developing. And that's what it does. And a lot of us on the progressive left, we look at that as sort of an exploitation of not only, America, but also of cheap foreign labor. And we see the exploitation of the workers. And it brings us back to, thinking about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, right? And they still have similar things going on in India and China. And, what they need to do is, I mean, we had a head start in industrialization. right? And so we got through that period where where a country could have exploited us. In fact, I think the UK, Great Britain back then, did exploit us to a certain point, right?
Yes,
I mean,
no doubt.
And so
It was
because
a-
we were
it
a
was a
developing
circle,
country
really.
back then, and they had the British Empire.
Yep.
We exploited
And
them.
so-
They exploited us. It was a
Yeah.
circle, really.
Yeah, and so now we're, Western countries are more doing that towards Southeast Asia, and until they catch up, it's going to continue the cycle of exploitation, or unless there's some sort of intervening action by companies or governments, etc. And I don't honestly know if any of that's going to happen, and so I don't really see the manufacturing base coming back too strongly here in America like it used to, and so I think there has to be some sort of remedy to that.
Yeah.
Raising the wages for service workers and not relying so much on the gig economy.
Yeah, but I think you can. But you will find some allyship with some social conservatives that want more foundries here again, just to preserve the knowledge. I mean, you don't want to outsource that knowledge. It just like you have generals, which I guess are the CEOs, but everyone knows that most of the work's done by the sergeants, right? So you need good foundrymen, you need good machinists. You can't export all of that.
Right.
So I'm just saying you can find, if you word it right, I definitely think you could find some allyship on the right on that.
I mean, I think we can find allyship in a lot of different places when it comes to policy, and it's just all about, as you said, starting conversations.
Yeah. And that's good. And I think finding the base too, again, you seem to be a patriotic American. That's cool. And it's interesting. Like, I don't make too much of like, oh, the Bernie bros are bad or these people are bad. And it's like everyone gets it from everyone else. It's like we've got it mostly from Antifa, but then the Bernie bros probably not getting as much from Antifa. They're getting it from the centrist Dems. And, it's like, everybody's treating each other bad online, and maybe we all got to be a little bit better on that.
Look, on Twitter, it's bad. I think Twitter is basically a platform designed to have people dunk on each other.
Yeah.
Really, that's kind of what I use it for.
Dunk and brag.
I mean,
and
dunk on
there's
ridiculous
no argument.
takes, but
that's fun. That's fun to do sometimes.
It can be a good release valve, but then again, you got to think, and there are real people behind those screens too.
Of course.
But there's also real bad faith actors behind those screens too, and bots and trolls and people out to ruin each other's day. So it does help when you see that, when you start to kind of be able to tell who's who, right?
Yeah.
So mainly my kind of rule on Twitter is more to punch up.
Okay. Yeah, no, our Twitter conversations have been good. We're usually arguing over healthcare or something, but it's always polite. You've never taken a shot at me, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, look, one thing that I can't stand is going ad hominem, and so and look, people do that to me all the time. I don't really care. I think the other day I got called Nosferatu, which I thought.
Oh, isn't that from the Evil Dead? All right.
Like, yeah, that's kind of cool. I mean, whatever. I'll take it. But a lot of what I get, and I even get it from fellow Bernie supporters too, and so like you say something, because we're all little communities there and communities in fight. I get it from Clinton supporters, Warren supporters, conservatives, of course, Trump supporters, and even so Bernie supporters. So it's just one of those things about being online is. You're always going to be attacked, and that's just part of it.
And the occasional tanky, maybe, right? Which something I had to learn. That's somebody that supports like the Stalinist style, like Soviet Union stuff. So they're funny and rare. Last question though, and this is I'd love your opinion on. Like, a lot has been made in politics and money. I know Cenk Uygur says this a ton. Like, we got to get rid of the politics and money. We got to get rid of the special interests. We got to get rid of the money. But Bloomberg and Steyer, just like, especially Bloomberg, blowing $500 million or something. He gets a couple delegates from American Samoa. Like, Steyer doesn't hardly move the needle. Is politics and money, does that hurt that argument? Like, it seems like it's more influence. Maybe fame goes farther than money.
Well, certainly name recognition is one of the most important things. But when you're looking at really, and this is where the problem lies, is in smaller races. So when you've got smaller races and you've got an unlimited amount of money, and look, I think a lot of conservatives might be open to this argument. Do you want somebody from, you're in Idaho or you're in Pennsylvania? Do you want somebody from California blowing a whole bunch of money to blanket your state full of ads?
Well, yeah, I mean, in theory, no, but how much do they matter? I mean, Bloomberg got nothing.
Well,
it depends on the context. Again, you smaller races, you're going to have a little bit more, you're going to be able to move that needle a little bit more. Primaries generally don't get a lot of traction, like in the normal voter's mind, right? I mean, look, a lot of voters, I forget the percentage, but there was a huge amount of voters that made up their minds pretty much the day before Super Tuesday. And a lot of that came from endorsements, not necessarily ads, right? And so you had endorsements and you had the news cycle, you had the media cycle, and all that. I think what makes the biggest difference in ads, really, is not on the voter, but on media networks. I mean, because who's getting paid to air those ads? CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all these different media outlets. And then you get that ad spending. And that's really who doesn't want that ad money to go away. These major media networks that will then, of course, go and defend that system. And so, I mean, that's a great reason to get it out, because you've got these corporations that want to keep the status quo, no change, no good policy, because they get ad money from this, from pharmaceutical companies, from health insurance companies, from defense contractors. How many ads do you see on, like, if you watch, CNN or MSNBC? I see fracking ads all the time. And of course, they're not going to do any sort of segments on climate change. I don't see really a whole lot of that, at least on CNN. And so that's really where the big problem is, not necessarily in getting or swinging votes. I think the big corruption is really should be focused on the media.
Right. Yeah. The media narrative is when you look at Biden and how he has gotten to where he is, the media is a big part of it. Yeah. It's almost 98% of how he is where he is. And without media support, he'd be dead in the water. He would be dead in the water, no question about it.
And you tweeted out like that MSNBC was Fox News for white upper middle class liberals. Yep. And I was like, that I agree. Like, I totally agree on that. Well, it's true.
I mean, look, Fox News was created by Roger Ailes in order to be the messaging arm of the Republican Party. That's essentially what MSNBC is. Yeah. I mean, Phil Griffin is an insider. He did famously tell Cenk, "Hey, we're insiders, so don't go up against the establishment, because that's who we are. We make our money from these politicians. Don't go bad-mouthing Obama. That's not what our network is about." And you got to look at some of the coverage from MSNBC as well. Rachel Maddow is basically nicknamed on the progressive left as Russia Maddow. Yeah. Because that's all she talks about. But it's good money. Look at her ratings. They're amazing. Yeah. Compared to what MSNBC has gotten before. And so they've really kind of hit on that cash cow. Yeah. And so anything to keep that money flowing.
Yeah. Fox News seems to be a little more diverse since it's so big. You got the Tucker Carlson wing, who are more populist, right-wing populist, versus, say, the Brett Baiers, which are the more conservative, straight conservatives. So it's different. It's hard to plug Fox News because it is it's like the United States. It's diverse.
Well, the big difference now in Fox News than it was before is the departure of Roger Ailes. And so before, Roger Ailes did a lot of, hey, here's what I want you to cover. Now they don't do that much anymore, and Tucker Carlson is allowed to go and, well, not allowed, but he goes and he's like, okay, this is what I want to talk about. This is the angle that I want to go, more populist, right wing, but populist nonetheless. And then you got, again, your straight news guys, and you get the Fox and Friends people who are, people who obviously love the president a lot. Yeah. And so But even so, I disagree with them from time to time because they're allowed to have a little bit more editorial freedom than they used to.
Okay.
MSNBC is now operating more under the system that they had with Ailes, Fox News had with Ailes. So you've got, Phil Griffin that says, okay, here's what I want you guys to kind of talk about. Here's what you shouldn't talk about. I mean, if you guys remember the late Ed Schultz, during 2016, he was explicitly told, you will not cover Bernie Sanders.
And he got fired
He
for
got fired
covering Bernie
for
Sanders.
wanting
Really?
to. Yes.
Yep, 100%.
I didn't know that. Okay.
No.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm getting a signal from my producer here that we're running against an hour here.
But that's
I don't know
cool.
if you.
I
don't know if you
appreciate
have
the
a time limit.
analysis on Fox News. I like that.
There's a lot more we can talk about. Clearly, a lot of discussion we can have on these topics here, and as the political season heats up as much as it hasn't already heated up to that level, we can certainly have some more discussion, and there's certainly a lot of discussion that we can have going forward. So, Jeff, how do people find you on social networking? How do people find your channel?
Well, obviously, youtube.com/TYTNation. I do a show every day, 3 p.m. Eastern. So check that out. Social media at ATN on TYT or Just Politics, which is my shitposting account.
That's great. Yeah, and I like Jeff. I'll definitely endorse him from a libertarian standpoint in that
Thank you.
he's a guy that will talk to you and you can get that other point of view, because it's really important to engage with the other side, whether you agree or not, because a lot of the times what your initial thought is, what they think is not right. So it's important to engage for me to fully understand what your position is, and there's always value in that.
And if you want to check out our channel, go to our Patreon, patreon.com/MythicMilwaukee. We also have a Subscribestar page. It is there's not much up there right now, but Subscribestar/Mythinformed. Sorry, Mythinformed is our channel. So if you want to support our channel and come to our next event, it's in Milwaukee this year. Check it out.
That's right. Yep, ahead of the DNC, and we hope everything will go really well. We're not sure what's going to happen with the DNC. We think it's going to be Biden, but we'll see. I'm not going to make that call, but it sounds like you were kind of resigned. But we should talk about the next time the future of the Democratic Party, where you think that's going to go way in the future. That would be a lot of fun. But we really appreciate your thoughtfulness and it being part of what we're trying to do, better discourse.
Well, thank you guys for, again, inviting me and having me on and allowing me to have these great conversations.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.